Cartoons. Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the American System of Political Economy. We have none other than the leading authority on the American system, Mr. Neil Martin. Mr. Martin has another one of those historical figures from antiquity, from the 19th century for us. This time is Mr. Giles B Stebbins. I'm going to give an intro and then I'm going to turn it right over to Neil to dive right into why Giles B Stebbins is somebody that you need to know. Mr. Stebbins was more than an abolitionist and Christian. He was a staunch protectionist, and this defined his economic philosophy. He worked alongside Frederick Douglass and participated in the Underground Railroad. But his advocacy for protectionism was his most important contribution. Stebbins delivered the memorial for John Lord Hayes, the second most important or the second most prominent protectionist of the late 19th century, following a tradition where key figures in political economy honored their predecessors. Stebbins was a universal thinker who combined economics, intelligence, history, and philosophy. He strongly opposed Henry George, seeing George's views on private property and protectionism as misguided and harmful. George's free trade ideology, admired by Joseph Stiglitz, ignored the realities of economic development. Stebbins, with a high view of man, identified Alexander Hamilton and Henry C. Carey as the leading political economists, unlike George, John Stuart Mills, or Mr. Stiglitz. In America's Protectionist Manual, Stebbins highlighted Henry Carey's data-driven argument against free trade, contrasting them with free traders' reliance on unsustained theory. He quoted Alexander Hamilton's report on manufacturers, emphasizing that protective tariffs ultimately reduce prices by fostering domestic competition. He also addressed the farmer's need for a home market, advocating for economic diversity and domestic commerce over dependence on British imports. Stebbins extensively mapped the American system, a feat achieved only by a few economists. He also refuted Henry George's Progress on Poverty and Protection of Free Trade, challenging George's pessimistic view of industrial civilization. While George blamed economic struggles on industrial progress and praised British free trade, Stebbins saw free trade as a tool of British control. Unlike George, who downplayed slavery's impact compared to British land policies, Stebbins focused on economic empowerment through protectionism. Ultimately, Stebbins rejected George's worldview, which mirrors modern globalist agendas. While figures like the World Economic Forum push narratives that undermine industry and progress, Stebbins championed economic self-sufficiency, national commerce, and human ingenuity. Without further ado, I hand you over to Mr. Neil Martin on the subject of Giles B. Stebbins versus Henry George. Over to you, Neil.
Hello. So this presentation is going to be on Giles B. Stebbins. Giles B. Stebbins provided us with wonderful economic intelligence in his refutation of Henry George. Now, the question to ask, how come Henry George didn't use the same economic intel as Giles B. Stebbins did? Well, maybe because Henry George was a free trader and Giles B. Stebbins represented the American system of political economy. Now, if you have a discussion, or if you want to call it a discussion with ChatGPT, the one on X, the one on wherever you go to, they will tell you that Henry George is the best American economist of the 19th century. The jabroni, quackademic, evil person, Joseph Stiglitz will say the same thing, right? What I'm going to do in this presentation, I'm going to show you all on how Giles B Stebbins had superior economic intelligence, superior with the American system of political economy, and we are just going to humiliate Henry George and the free trade crowd. We're going to humiliate John Stuart Mill. We're going to humiliate Joseph Stiglitz. Victor, the next slide. All right, so the pamphlet that Giles B Stebbins wrote is called Progress from Poverty, as in you can progress after poverty. Henry George is thinking there is nothing, but there's no progress when you have progress. Instead of progress, you have progress and misery, progress and poverty, right? So we already see on how Henry George is pessimistic about civilization. Of review and criticism of Henry George's Progress and Poverty and Protection or Free Trade by Giles B Stebbins, Detroit, Michigan. Chicago, Charles H. Kerr and Company, 175 Dearborn Street, 1887. Giles B Stebbins, Economic Intelligence, right? Now, people might be asking the question, what is economic intelligence? Economic intelligence is nothing but economic history, but it's very crucial. So we call it economic intelligence. It's something crucial to understand the situation, to understand man, to understand the people fighting to implement the U.S. Constitution, and to understand the free trade crowd, the British faction, right? Okay, so Victor, the next slide show, please. Okay, Henry George is of the assumption that progress leads to poverty and misery, right? We have economic intelligence that Henry George should have seen, should have known of. He doesn't use this economic intelligence that I'm about to use, and Giles B Stebbins used it. Why did Giles B Stebbins use this upcoming economic intelligence? Because he represented the American system of political economy. No free trader will cite this. Right. Okay. In 1860 in Massachusetts, 13,031 depositors had in savings banks 1.6 million in 1880, in deposits, right? In 1880, the depositors, mostly working men and women, had increased to 117,000 and 137, with their net deposits reaching 42,091,592 from 1860 to 1881. The savings banks deposits of 9 states, all except California in the manufacturing eastern section, increased 628 million and reached a total of 787 million. The protection robber system having full sway all this time, and land being higher and wealth of capitalists greater than in other sections where the accumulated savings were far less. Oh my God, hold on. Mr. Henry George is saying, right, when you have the robber, the protectionist robber, the evil capitalist, when they're making money, and when land is in when land increases in value, that the working class is suffering. Well, they weren't suffering in Massachusetts. They weren't suffering in the eastern part of the United States of America because they had a diversity of employment. They had domestic commerce, right? Look at this. 13,000 depositors had a savings and 1.6 million and 1.6 million, right? So we're looking at in Massachusetts in 1860, you had a potential of $1.6 million devoted towards private credit, right? In 1880, you had 117,137 people with deposits of $42 million in Massachusetts. What does this represent? That $42 million represents a potential of private credit. Private credit grew. Who is going to say that? Is Henry George, when Henry George looks at this statistic, is he going to say, oh, this is good? Private credit grew. Oh, men and women, they're increasing their standard of living. Their material wealth is growing. They're benefiting from inventive genius. You actually have a good economic policy. No, he doesn't say this, right? Henry George is of the opinion that the protective system is not going to generate wealth and is not going to be of any good usage to the poor or or the poor laborer, right? And we look at this, right? I look at this and I say, hold on. Massachusetts in 1880, there's savings banks, otherwise known as money shops. That's what Henry Carey calls them. Henry Carey calls money savings banks money shops. What's the purpose of the money shop? To circulate money, to employ money. We don't have that in the United States of America or in Europe. Money is not employed. Private credit is not being used properly. National credit is not being used properly. Is Henry George going to say anything about that? Will Henry George ever say that private credit is not being used properly? He doesn't like private credit. He doesn't like creativity. He has a bad view of government and a bad view of man, right? And a bad banking philosophy. If anyone saw this quote, right? The nine eastern states now have a total of $787 million of potential private credit. You should be celebrating. You should be saying this is good. While this is happening, wealth is increasing. Capitalists are growing. Accumulated savings are growing. The living standards of the population is growing. But according to Henry George, when you have protectionism, you have misery. Because when Henry George is saying, oh, progress and poverty, he's linking protectionism to poverty, right? Well, I want to ask the question, how come Henry George, in his progress and poverty and protection or free trade, didn't detail with statistics and newspaper stories on how whenever the United States of America had protectionism, the population lived in misery and there weren't any color revolutions? There was none. What was happening with the growth of the money shop, which coincided with the growth of domestic commerce because of protectionism, the American system of political economy, this did wonders for the U.S. economy. Henry George and the British free trade system did not like that. Next slide show, Victor. Okay, all right. So this guy, Joseph Stiglitz, he calls Henry George the best 19th century economist of American history, right? I want this to sink in. Joseph Stiglitz is calling Henry George the guy with the horrible view of man, the guy with the horrible banking philosophy, the guy with the horrible view of government, and the guy who's a British concubine of the system of free trade is hailed as the United States of America greatest economist of the 19th century. Let's see what Giles B Stebbins has to say about Henry George. A few sentences from different pages of Progress and Poverty show how the author is thus possessed and absorbed. Private ownership of land he sees as his greatest scourge and plague. Rent crushes and curses labor. Material progress, inventive genius, wealth, productive terrorists, and dense populations are attendant evils, grinding to the dust the poor working man. What is Henry George really attacking? The stupid Henry George people, they're probably paying attention to private ownership of land, right? What Henry George is attacking, he's attacking protective tariffs, he's attacking material progress, and more importantly, inventive genius. I'm not focusing on protective tariffs. The reason why I'm not focusing on protective tariffs is that this guy, Henry George, has no idea what he's talking about concerning protectionism. His arguments are not original. We're going to go after on how he has the audacity to say that an inventive genius grinds to dust the poor working man. Inventive genius. How can anyone say this but Joseph Stiglitz and ChatGPT and X calls Henry George the best American economist of the 19th century? I am just going to humiliate Henry George, right? Okay, so inventive genius. What is inventive genius responsible for? It's responsible for economic solutions. It's responsible for making sure that man in participates in the creator's intelligence. Henry George doesn't want man participating in the creator's intelligence. This is a big red flag. If Henry George does not want mankind to participate in the creator's intelligence, what is his view of man? What is his view of economy? Right? So we focus on inventive genius. Let's see. Machine tools come in mind when someone mentions inventive genius. Is someone going to tell me that machine tools didn't help out civilization? That machine tools were nothing but misery and destruction upon poor people? No. Victor, you got to go to the previous slideshow. Right? Okay. So the machine tool sector was very important. But what about the minds that were responsible for the inventive genius? Okay. All right. So does Henry George believe that Beethoven was evil to the poor? Does Henry George believe that Kepler was evil to the poor? Does Henry George believe that Gottfried Leibniz didn't serve the poor? Did Henry George believe that Jean Baptiste Colbert didn't serve the poor? Did Henry George believe that Alexander Hamilton was an evil to the poor? Did Henry George believe that Henry Carey was evil to the poor? And lastly, does Henry George believe that Lyndon H. LaRouche, the GOAT of political economy, Lyndon LaRouche was no evil to the poor? He was the inventive genius. And Giles B and Henry George is saying that, oh, inventive genius doesn't do anything for the working class. Who would believe this stuff? You got to be stupid, right? Henry George has just reached new lows, right? He's attacking inventive genius. Who else attacks inventive genius? Let's see, socialists and anarchists. Do you know where socialists and anarchists got their arguments from concerning the world? They got it from Henry George. Henry George, who may deny calling himself a socialist, Well, he helped out the socialists and anarchists make up these insane arguments, insane ideas. And what was it all based upon? Oh, we have to get rid of private ownership of land. That's what we were attacking. No, they were not attacking that. They were attacking material progress, protective tariffs, and most importantly, inventive genius. That's what they were attacking, right? How can this guy be seen as the 19th Americans' best economist of the 19th century with his attack on inventive genius? This is economic intel. If you present this quote, the socialists, anarchists, communists, free traders, whatever they call themselves, right? What are they going to focus on? All right, keep that in mind. Victor, next slideshow. All right, so what's happening in this slideshow? This slide is that John Stuart Mill and Henry George are attacking energy flux density, which will be explained during the reading of the quote. Before there was the World Economic Forum, there was John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill is Dr. No from Austin Powers. Sorry for the pop reference. And Henry George is Mini-Me, right? This presentation may focus on Mini-Me, but I'm going after John Stuart Mill. Okay. This saying of John Stuart Mill is approvingly quoted as a motto at the head of a chapter of Progress and Poverty by Henry George. Hitherto, it is questionable if all the mechanical inventions yet made have lightened the day's toil of human being. If either the author or approver of this strange saying will go to an old farm and swing the scythe or the cradle and rake and bind hay and grain and use the pitchfork for a week, and then go to a farm where modern implements are used, ride on the mower and reaper and horse rake, and see hay and grain go up into the barn loft in the grip of moving fingers of steel, they will find what an absurd mistake they made. Millions of our farmers will testify gladly that the hard day's work toil of old-time farming has been lightened by mechanical inventions, and the productiveness of their labor largely increased also. How can John Stuart Mill say that? How in the world can John Stuart Mill say this? And how in the world can Henry George quote John Stuart Mill in saying that mechanical inventions have not lightened the toil of mankind? They are essentially saying that energy flux density did not do anything at all to improve the life of the laborer, to make his life easier, right? What's energy flux density? Energy flux density is when you increase the input, but it's with you increase the input low input, and you get a higher output, right? So working on a farm with regular farm implements, which is being used in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, they are still using old equipment, not ran by machinery. The farms are not ran by machinery. A large amount of them are not ran by machinery. And John Stuart Mill has the audacity to say that those farmers in that type of predicament are no better off than the farmers who have technology. Come on. This is a complete attack on energy flux density. It is a complete attack on what mankind is, right? Mankind was given the ultimate commandment by God. Be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. Just a question. is man being fruitful, multiplying, replenishing the earth, and subduing it when he's using old farming methods, or when he is using new modern farming methods? I would like to see someone who's going to say that the farming methods of the 17th century and 18th century is better than the farming methods of the 19th and 20th century. Henry George is going to tell you that, oh, the farming methods of the 17th and 18th century were just as good as the farming implements of the 19th century and 20th century. They are out of their mind insane. And Henry George is called America's best economist of the 19th century. We're taking a look at this economic intelligence, right? John Stuart Mill is saying mechanical inventions did not make life easy for man. He's doing the Malthus. What do I mean when he's doing them? What do I mean when I say he's doing the Malthus? When Malthus said that population outpaces food production, did Malthus ever talk about food production? Did he ever talk about the science of chemistry in agriculture? Did he ever talk about agriculture? And now we're taking a look at John Stuart Mill and Henry George. They're using the same method as Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo used, right? They want to suppress creativity in man. Because when you had mankind go from making extraordinary farming equipment, that must mean you have a hell of a damn great manufacturing sector. And what did the protectionists say when you had massive, beautiful, wonderful manufacturing sector? Your agriculture is box office. Why is it box office? It is box office because it has become a science and they're using extraordinary, wonderful machinery. So, what Henry George is talking about when he says mechanical inventions haven't improved the lives of people, he's full of shit. Next slide show, Keith. Next slide show, Victor. Okay. All right. So, Henry George is of the opinion that free trade increases foreign commerce more, right? And this is showing that free trade works and that protectionism is nothing. Okay, we'll see. Protection can too increase foreign commerce. Let me repeat that. Protection can too increase foreign commerce. In Progress and Poverty, it is said free trade has enormously increased the wealth of Great Britain without decreasing pauperism. It is a it is a it is a favorite false method of some English writers to show the alleged prosperity which free trade has brought their country by giving statistics of their trade while making no comparisons with the trade of other countries. Mongredian, for instance, says in 1840 the foreign trade of the United Kingdom exports and imports was 172 million pounds. By 1878, it was 614 million pounds, a marvelous increase. But the foreign trade of protective France increased in greater ratio meanwhile, and the foreign trade of 202 million to 1.1 billion, while the British trade gained 350%. That of our own country gained 550%, an increase more marvelous and largely while we had a protective policy. So what Giles B Stebbins just did, he said, okay, you want to say that British free trade had their foreign commerce increase from 1840 from 1840 up until 1878, right? Okay. Giles B Stebbins says, well, France is a protective country. And you know, you free traders like saying that protectionism decreases foreign commerce. Well, France increased their foreign commerce from 200 million to 1.1 billion dollars for foreign commerce. And you're saying that protectionism doesn't help out foreign commerce, right? And then he says that America's foreign commerce grew by 550%. But hold on. France and the United States of America were protective nations. And according to Henry George, France and the United States must have been in an economic shithole because they had protectionism, right? How in the world is protectionism outperforming British free trade? I'm going to tell you something, right? The United States and France at that time period, they were probably seeing an increase of domestic commerce. They were seeing an increase of domestic consumption. They were seeing an increase of the standard of living for their population. Can the British say that? Can the British really say that? Can the British really say, oh, our increase of foreign commerce benefited other countries? Let's see. The British increased their foreign commerce to Ireland. What did Ireland get? A potato famine and genocide. Over 4 million Irish people died of genocide. Compliments of British free trade. Then we look at India, right? Okay. Over 37 million Indians died of famine in the 19th century in India. They were trade partners with the British, but they didn't have domestic commerce, right? France, they had trade with England, but they had domestic commerce. They were protecting their domestic commerce. Same thing with the United States of America. Turkey had trade with England. What happened to Turkey? Free trade with the tariff for revenue at 3 to 5% destroyed Turkey. The Ottoman Empire, what they call it, right? The Muthian Treaty in 1703. This is in the 18th century. I moved back some, right? They were they that the Muthian Treaty greatly increased England's foreign trade, mainly with Portugal. And what happened to Portugal? Portugal got screwed. They were never the same, right? So what I'm saying is that foreign trade, just because you think foreign trade is increasing in a free trade nation, do not think that it's doing any country better, right? If foreign trade is increasing in a protectionist nation, you might see something of the lives of the domestic laborers increasing. You might also see something of domestic commerce increasing because domestic commerce, right? You build up your domestic commerce to have foreign commerce. You don't build up your foreign commerce to have domestic commerce. You build up your domestic commerce to have foreign commerce because the nations that want to push foreign trade, just like the British, they want to destroy every domestic commerce there is on the planet. They hate nation states. Next slide show, Victor. Okay. All right. So this is the question. What is the most important part of this quote? Jabronis do not know economic intelligence. Because what the jabroni is going to choose, or what the economist is going to choose, or what Joe Stiglitz is going to choose, or Henry George are going to choose the first thing. Right. Free traders do not know economic intel, and that's the truth. You can bank on that. That land speculation is the true cause of industrial depression is in the United States clearly evident. It is the way of accounting for such depressions natural to a man whose mind is so filled with land theories and alleged robbery by rent as to have scant room for plain facts. What are the plain facts? For some years, from 1842 to 1846, British manufacturers were very active in efforts to break down our tariff. It is said that $1.25 million was spent here by their agents in Washington and elsewhere. Okay, what's the most important part of that quote? I'll tell you something. It has nothing to do with land speculation. Henry George is a complete jabroni. I might want to say he could be evil, or he is evil. And Joseph Stiglitz is evil because they're not going to pay attention to the bottom, right? Giles B Stebbins is the only political economist that milks this fact. He has this quote in another pamphlet of his, right? And what is it saying? It is saying that British manufacturers wanted to destroy the tariff of 1842. My question is, if Henry George is saying that protectionism is a blight and a misery and causes economic decay and destruction, why do the British have to spend any money on getting rid of it? Wouldn't there just be a popular unrest, civil unrest, class struggle, what the communists call it, and it will bring down protectionism? No, they don't bring down protectionism that way. The British don't believe in laissez-faire when it comes to destroying nation states. If the British want to destroy nation states, they're going to play a hands-on part in doing it. And that's what they did. Let me state again. For some years, from 1842 to 1846, British manufacturers were very active in efforts to break down our tariff. It was said that about $1.25 million was spent here by their agents in Washington and elsewhere. Will Henry George ever speak about this? If Henry George saw this quote, what would be his reaction? If Henry George he should have had all this intelligence on how the British wanted to destroy protectionism. There is no reason at all why Henry George didn't know what the British wanted to do about protectionism. Henry George hated protectionism. He hated the nation state. He's never going to include this in a political economy pamphlet or a book. His puppets, his goons, his concubines, they're not going to mention this. They're going to focus on, land speculation. Oh, that's the greatest evil on the planet. What, you saying protectionism? Oh, protectionism doesn't cause that much evil, right? Oh, you're saying that the British spent $1.25 million to get rid of the protective tariff of 1842? They're not going to talk about that. They're just not going to talk about that. Henry George doesn't want to fight for the economic independence of the United States of America. He would not say that British free trade was economic warfare upon the world. He would say free trade was God sent, for now the consumers were being attended to and the manufacturer's interests were crushed. If you crush domestic commerce in the United States, don't you think you attack the largest base of consumption? If you attack domestic commerce, you attack the largest base of consumption in the United States. That's the working class. If you get rid of domestic commerce, if you get rid of the protective tariff, you're fighting a war on an economic warfare upon the population. But Henry George, the guy who is seen by Stiglitz and ChatGPT and X as the greatest 19th century American economist, doesn't cover this. Just leaves it, just doesn't even talk about on how the British wanted to destroy the 1842 tariff. Doesn't even talk about it. Does Joe Stiglitz talk about that? No. Does ChatGPT talk about that? No. Would John Stuart Mill talk about that? No. Would Milton Friedman, a jabroni, a post-Carnes free trader, would he talk about that? No, he has no business in looking into economic history. What you got to understand about these present modern day free traders, who I call post Carnes free traders, they're not interested in economic history. All they're interested in is theory. Next slide show, Victor. Okay, put this on your mind. Who will organize for the Belt and Road Initiative? We are going to see two views of man, right? Don't seek the kingdom, make man the immortal species. Let me repeat. Don't seek the kingdom, make man the immortal species. Which one of these two? The people that pursue the kingdom or the people that make man Lord make man the immortal species? Which one is going to do better for civilization? We'll find out. This is Giles B Stebbins. Manifest in the progress of man is the truth that through all things an upward tendency is irresistibly streams. The divine plan and intent, not a dream or a legend, but the great fact of history. The toiler who builds the useful railroad is better off than the toiler who built the pyramids to perpetuate the pride of the Egyptian pharaohs. As it has been so, it is to be so. The path of man on earth leads up, and it is fit work for us to join and clear the way that the weak as well as the strong may walk therein. Doubtless, it leads up in the life beyond of that immortal hope. Henry George well says, the poets have sung it, the seers have told it, and in its deepest pulses, the heart of man throbs responsive to his truth. Now this is Giles Stebbins speaking. We would not dim that hope, but would look through the gates ajar to know the nearness and reality of that higher existence. To make this world hopeless and only find hope in another is an innovating era, a great break in the great plan. All right. So what's the first thing? Okay. So Henry George is saying the life of man has an upward tendency towards progress. Well, the people who want you to seek the kingdom, the Henry George people, they say that man doesn't have a tendency to progress. He has a tendency to decline, right? Okay, so the Belt and Road Initiative, launched by China, idea of Lyndon LaRouche, the GOAT in political economy, the guy who came up with the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative, but it was called the Eurasian Land Bridge, right? LaRouche organized for the Eurasian Land Bridge. He wasn't seeking the kingdom. He wanted man to be the immortal species. Where does Henry George fall again in this? He wants mankind seeking the kingdom, right? That's Henry George, right? Henry George doesn't think that the path of men on earth leads up. He doesn't think that, right? Let's go down further in the quote. We will not dim that hope. Henry George is accused by Giles B Stebbins of dimming the hope of mankind. Giles B Stebbins says, we cannot make the world hopeless and think of heaven. We cannot break away from the great plan. We can't break away from the great plan, the divine plan. We have to manifest on how man participates in the intelligence of the creator. And if we believe that man participates in the intelligence of the creator, are we going to be seeking the kingdom, or are we going to be building and financing the Belt and Road Initiative? This is just wonderful, right? We use Giles B Stebbins' philosophy and theology to justify the BRI. That's what I just did. I used Giles B Stebbins' theology and philosophy to justify the BRI. Fantastic, right? Would Henry George do that? No. Would John Stuart Mill do that? No. Would Joseph Stiglitz do that? No. Would a socialist like Bernie Sanders do that? No. Would an anarchist do that? No. Would a communist do that? No. Would a free trader do that? No. Only someone from the American system of political economy would, right? We are not seeking the kingdom. We're seeking to make mankind the immortal species. That's what we're doing. We're keeping to God's great plan. Next slide show, please, Victor. Okay, this is one of my favorite quotes, right? Ask this question. Who's going to buy the $9.5 billion of goods that the United States of America has as product of domestic commerce in the United States? The secret weapon to justify protectionism. Yep, I said it. Domestic commerce needs to be nationally recognized. Okay. So what I'm saying is that protectionism is what has domestic commerce gains ground and has domestic commerce grow and flourish, right? You can't have domestic commerce and free trade. You need protection and domestic commerce, right? Okay. By the report of the Bureau of Statistics in Washington, 1884, our domestic commerce was over 9.5 billion yearly, or 13 times as great as our exports. 13 times as great as our exports. 15 times as great as our imports, and 7 times as great as all our foreign commerce. This internal trade, home production, and home exchange is far greater than that of Great Britain or any other country, and is the means of thrift for the people which our protective policy helps to build up. This right here is showing us how big America's domestic commerce was. Sadly, Henry George thinks that foreign trade should be hegemonic. What happens when foreign trade is hegemonic? Ask the partners of Britain. I already went through on what happened to India, Ireland, the Ottoman Empire, and Portugal. What happened to countries when they devoted their time to foreign trade and they neglected domestic commerce? They're in the shithole. Take a look at sub-Saharan Africa. Where's the domestic commerce? Where's the domestic commerce in the United States of America? It's mainly foreign commerce. Where's the domestic commerce in Mexico? Where's the domestic commerce in Venezuela? Where's the domestic commerce in Brazil? Where's the domestic commerce in Argentina? Where's the domestic commerce in England? Where's the domestic commerce in Germany? Where's the domestic commerce in India? Where's the domestic commerce in Australia? Where's the domestic commerce in Canada? Go on and on and on. In Italy, where's the domestic commerce? Right? Giles B Stebbins said this is an unbelievable, fantastic piece of economic intel. 1884. There's no reason at all why free traders and that jabroni Henry George didn't know of this, and they of course never spoke about it because they said foreign trade is the holy grail, right? Giles B Stebbins is saying he's reporting $9.5 billion yearly, 13 times as great as our exports. What does that mean? I'll show you what it means. The United States exports was $731 million. Now, people should be able to do the math. Greater or lesser? $731 million compared to $9.5 billion. Which one is greater? You know, maybe free traders don't know how to do math and don't know how to count. Maybe they don't know how to count numbers properly. But I'm going to conclude that $9.5 billion creates more economic opportunity than $731 million, right? And what else do we have? Okay, we have the imports. The imports were the domestic commerce of the United States was 15 times as great as the imports with foreign countries. The United States of America, our domestic commerce was way bigger than our foreign commerce with nations. The foreign commerce of England wasn't bigger than the domestic commerce of the United States. France foreign commerce was not bigger than America's domestic commerce, right? And you can't say that the United States had a massive, big population. We haven't even reached 70 million people yet, right? We probably had about 60 million people, right? We had a great base of consumption because our base of consumption were treated like kings. What do I mean by treated like kings, right? They had a high standard of living. Wages were higher than in the United States, than in Europe, than in China, than in India, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Okay, so I, I say all this, right? Domestic commerce is box office. But Joseph Stiglitz is not going to talk about that. Henry George is not going to talk about that. Henry George never talked about how big America's domestic commerce was. The only people who spoke about how big America's domestic commerce was protectionists. That's all they spoke about. They spoke about how big is our domestic commerce. What did that mean? That meant that protectionism worked. What did that mean? That meant that the circulation of the currency was excellent, that there was great infrastructure. It was being used strategically. Raw materials were being used strategically. The farmer had a market, and private credit was growing, right? With this big $9.5 billion of domestic commerce. Who doesn't want such a big domestic commerce in their nation? Or do they want or do they want more foreign commerce? Take a look at the nations that built their wealth on foreign commerce, except for England. Take a look at them. Germany and Japan. What are they? Can they do anything at all to change the fate of man? No, they are political pussies. Germany allowed for the United States to blow up a gas pipeline. Japan wanted to build up Ibero-America. The United States of America said, no Japan south of the US border. Japan got punked, right? So what we're seeing how box office domestic commerce was, right? Domestic, if you solidify your economy and organize your economy on domestic commerce, you are a sovereign nation state. On the other hand, if you build your economy on foreign trade, you're just going to wound up like Germany and Japan. And just take a look at the history of Germany and Japan and see where foreign commerce got them. They were concubines of America and England. All right, Victor. Next slide, show. Next slide. Okay. All right. So economic intelligence is leadership. This piece of economic intelligence by Giles B Stebbins says it all. And Henry George ain't no way he's gonna talk about this because Henry George is a British concubine, right? Okay. Henry George would never say this. Criticism of British free trade are not prompted by any ill feeling toward the people of Great Britain. The ties of a common lineage, of a common language and literature, and of large intercourse and personal friendship are not to be weakened. The fraternal feeling between us and the British people is, we trust, to last. We are glad of their prosperity and regret any adversity that may befall them. We honor and hold in love and reverence their great and true men and women, and they cherish like feelings towards eminent persons in this country. But when to keep our trade by checking the growth of our home industries, their traders and manufacturers, their scholars and leading gentry and nobility seek to shape our industrial policy and to intermeddle in our home affairs, we must say hands off. Okay, so Giles B Stebbins is saying, listen, you, the British, we're cool with you, but what you have to do, don't interfere in our politics. Don't interfere in our sovereignty. We want domestic commerce, right? You see that previous quote, $9.5 billion in domestic commerce. The British don't want that for the United States of America. They want to destroy domestic commerce and home industries in the United States of America. Is Henry George going to denounce the British for wanting to destroy home industries in the United States of America? No, he's not going to do that. Is Joseph Stiglitz going to do that? No. Is John Stuart Mill, Dr. Evil, and this guy Henry George, Mini Me, do they want that? No, they want the British to destroy the United States of America. That's what they want to do. They want to destroy the United States of America. And what Giles B. Stebbins is doing, he says the traders, the manufacturers, the scholars, the leading gentry and nobility want to destroy the United States of America. They want to destroy the American system of political economy. Henry George would never say that. And then you have these jabronis who say, well, where's the evidence of that? I just presented you with the evidence of that in the presentation. 1846, the British spent $1.25 million to get rid of the tariff. We mentioned the Cobden Club. The Cobden Club in the 1880s sent over thousands of pamphlets, hundreds of thousands of pamphlets to the West to try to hoodwink the farmer to support free trade and not the American system of political economy. I can talk about this for days on how much evidence we have. British free trade is economic warfare on the United States of America. And who wants economic warfare on the United States of America? The British manufacturers, the traders, the scholars, the leading gentry, and the nobility in the 19th century. Please tell that history. Don't go around saying as if free trade is the next coming of Jesus Christ and protectionism is the devil. Don't say that, right? Giles B. Stebbins utterly humiliated Henry George. And if you don't think I haven't humiliated Mini-Me, maybe you just don't like fighting on the side of man being the immortal species. Maybe you want to fight on the side of the people that want to seek the kingdom and say we're not going to go with a policy of building the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is the end of the presentation. Giles B. Stebbins did a great service to man with this pamphlet going against Henry George, and I'm done.